Friends, in this program on Ramayana, in which there will be 4 lectures, I am going to speak Ramayana and Shraut ritual. On this topic, I want to express myself. Before entering into the subject proper, I would like to draw the attention of the listeners to some general points. The first is about Ramayana as an epic. As you know, Mahabharata and Ramayana, these 2 epics are considered to be Arsha epics. And this word Arsha is used in contrast to the classical literature, which has been ascribed to different poets and authors. Mahabharata and Ramayana, these 2 epics are ascribed to great sages. Vyasa is supposed to be the author of Mahabharata, and Valmiki is supposed to be the author of Ramayana. The word author is not to be taken in the modern sense of the term, that a particular person wrote these poems, but rather it is to be understood in the sense of the traditional belief of people at large in India for last several years, that these 2 authors have composed these epics. From the modern point of view of history of literature, however, we cannot ascribe these 2 epics to any particular one person alone, but rather it was an activity which was carried out by numerous persons at different places and different times. This activity was mainly oral activity. In contrast to the modern concept that a person writes a poem, these things which are found in the epics Mahabharata and Ramayana, they were orally narrated, later on given a versified form, and they were handed down from one generation to the other generation. And this procedure was going on for a long time and at different places, and many persons tried to give their own contribution, and they were added to the original text. It is very difficult to point out what is original, what is interpolation, and so on. But still, on the basis of the principles of critical edition, the editors of Mahabharata as well as Ramayana have edited these texts, and they have decided what must be the possible original part. They have also recorded the variant readings. They have also recorded the longer portions, which can be considered as interpolations. So, according to the modern method of understanding the history of epic literature, we have to ascribe these two epics to Suta tradition. And the Sutas were considered to be people of mixed class. They were similar to the Bhat type of people who used to praise the patrons, who used to describe the heroic activities of various great personalities in the family of their patrons. But in the course of time, there used to be some additions, and in the beginning, they were floating in a floating form, and there was no fixed form as such. But as now we get these epics, they are in versified form. A very small portion of Mahabharata is in prose also. And both these epics have been edited on the basis of critical edition principles, and they have been published. Mahabharata is published by Mahabhandarka Institute, and Ramayana is published by the Oriental Institute in Baroda. Once this point is noted by us, that it was the Suta tradition, we can find out the strong as well as the weak points of these epics. We have to remember that the Sutas, they were not great scholars of any particular subject. They had a good general knowledge, and their poetic imagination was also limited. But still, there was a kind of liveliness in their narration. There is also freshness everywhere. But the limitations of these authors are also obvious, because these Sutas, they were not great scholars. Whatever they have written cannot be taken as scholarly work, and from the point of view of scholars, there are limitations, and with these limitations, we have to read these epics. Similarly, their poetic imagination was also not of very high quality. Moreover, as in any public speech, there are a lot of repetitions, exaggerations, and sometimes self-contradictions also. Because the audience also is mainly the audience consisting of ordinary people. They do not take these things like repetitions, extensiveness, etc. to be defects. Really speaking, they appreciate such points, and sometimes they even deserve these repetitions. Otherwise, they will forget many points. In this connection, we may compare these epics and their style to the style of many TV serials in which there is a lot of repetition and the progress is very slow. But in spite of this, people like these serials. These serials are extremely popular, and particularly when the serials on Ramayana and on Mahabharata were shown on TV, their popularity was tremendous. Not only all over India, but even in countries neighboring India, present day India, they also are directly or indirectly acquainted with the stories in Mahabharata or Ramayana. And the stories themselves were so full of emotion and other dramatic qualifications that these serials become extremely popular. Similarly, Ramayana and Mahabharata, these epics are also popular for many years, several years, many centuries, and they are popular all over India and to some extent in some neighboring countries also. But before discussing any point in connection with Mahabharata or Ramayana, we have to remember that these epics belong to Suta tradition and they are not the products of great scholars or academicians. Now, closely connected with this point, there is another point which is also worth mentioning, and that is the approach of the academicians towards these epics. Many times, the academicians who are also not always of the same standard and same qualifications, there are also good academicians, best academicians, bad academicians, and so on. And among these academicians, there is a style to study a particular work from a particular point of view. And on the basis of this study, they draw some conclusions. For example, a PhD student or even his guide, he may select a topic like political thoughts in Kalidasa's literature. And on the basis of this, generally one conclusion will be definitely there. That is, Kalidasa was very much well acquainted with political thoughts. Or one may collect the references to music in Kalidasa's literature, and one may conclude that he was a great lover of music, he was knowing many details of music, and so on. So in this way, one can study subjects like geography or history and many other topics. And in recent years, there is a new trend. I'm not going to discuss the correctness or incorrectness of that trend, but I'm only going to mention that trend. People try to find out modern science in ancient texts. So they will find out the theory of Pythagoras or some other geometrical, mathematical, physics, chemistry, and many other sciences which are known in modern days. And the conclusions will be that the authors of Veda or some other literature, they were knowing all these things already there, and they were already there. And this can be extended up to the modern things like TV or other diseases like AIDS and now Corona and so on. All these things were known to our forefathers, and India was very much scientifically progressed. That is a easy way of study of ancient Indian literature. I am not a student of this type, and therefore I am not going to claim any ancient text to be scientifically great or great from any other point of view. My approach is philological, and philology consists of two things. One, criticism of the text, that is textual edition, textual criticism. This is the first part of philology. And the second part is objective study of the literal meaning of any text. I don't want to claim that any of the ancient Indian text is relevant even today. So I am free from this relevance mania. Every day, whatever thinker was born or he died, on that day it is claimed that his thoughts are relevant even today. How these different thoughts can be relevant at the same time, nobody thinks of it. So relevance is not the criteria or criterion of deciding the greatness of a work. Every work or every great historical personality has its own importance historically, and we should not be anachronistic while studying the works or the activities of historical persons. Anachronism means kala viparyasa. So to find out the things which are in 21st century in a text which was composed 2000 years ago or 1500 years ago or something ancient text, this is a method which is anachronistic. So I would not like to follow this method. So with this introduction, I will now straightway come to the main topic of today's lecture, that is the Shrauta ritual in Ramayana. Now again, I have to give a brief introduction to the Shrauta literature and Shrauta ritual. What does the word Shrauta mean? The word Shrauta literally means connected with Shruti or Veda. That is, in short, Vedic ritual. But the word Shrauta is also used in a technical sense, in contrast to Griya ritual. So, Shrauta ritual and Griya ritual, we have to differentiate between these two types of rituals. And there are some texts which are called Vedanga texts. And some of these texts describe Shrauta ritual. They are called Shrauta Sutras. And some others, they are called Griya Sutras. They describe Griya ritual. Now, for the understanding of a common listener, I will give one or two examples only. All the rituals which are roughly called samskaras, like Upanayana, Vivaha, Anta Samskar, etc., they are included in the in the Griya rituals. While the sacrifices which are called Agnihotra, Darshapurna Masa, or Chaturmasya, Agnishtoma, Vajapeya, Ashwamedha, etc. These sacrifices, they are Shrauta sacrifices. Now, who can perform and what is the nature of these sacrifices? That is the next question. According to the tradition, every person belonging to either Brahmana, Kshatriya or Vaishya class can perform these domestic or Griya rituals, and with some preparation can perform the Shrauta rituals also. All these persons are expected first to study Veda, and they can study Veda after their Upanayana ceremony or initiation ceremony is performed. Then for some time they study Vedas and also study other literature which is useful for their profession. For example, a Kshatriya may study Dhanurvidya and other aspects of war. Vaishya may study some useful knowledge about trade and commerce, and so on. A Brahmana is expected to study only the Vedas, but in addition to that, he is also expected to study some philosophical texts which belong to Vedanta or Nyaya or Mimamsa schools, and he is expected to be a great scholar in a particular branch of these philosophical systems. Now, after this education is over, and when a student becomes slightly grown up and of marriageable age, he marries, and at the time of marriage, which is also a kind of domestic ritual, some ritual is performed with the help of a fire. Some offerings are made in fire, and the marriage is completed. So the fire which is used at the time of the marriage ritual is expected to be maintained by that married man who is now a grihastha. He has to maintain this fire. This fire is also called domestic or Griya fire. And every day he has to perform some ritual with the help of this fire. He has to make some daily offerings in the morning, in the evening. He has to perform also some rituals at the time of new moon, full moon. And every day also one has to perform some other small or big rituals. For example, he has to welcome his guests. And these details, all these details are given in Griya Sutras. Of course, some people who are sufficiently rich and more enthusiastic and more devoted to religious practices, they expect to be able to perform some Shrauta rituals also. For that, they have to first establish 3 sacred fires. And these fires are called Ahvaniya, Dakshina, and Garhapatya. So all the Shrauta rituals are performed with the help of these 3 Shrauta fires. And it is very much essential in order to be able to perform Shrauta rituals that one must have established these fires. And the second very important condition of being qualified in order to perform Shrauta ritual is that one must have his wife present at the time of performance of this ritual. A woman cannot perform any Shrauta ritual independently. But without woman or wife also, a man cannot perform any Shrauta ritual. So in case man is unmarried, or even after marriage, if his wife is not living, or he has divorced, or due to some other reason, his wife is not available, then he cannot perform any Shrauta ritual. This point is very important for the discussion which I am going to make afterwards about the Shrauta ritual in Ramayana. So please remember that the presence, physical presence of the wife is very much essential for the performance of any Shrauta ritual. Now, Shrauta rituals are of numerous types. Without going into more details of them, I will roughly divide them into 2 classes. One which is called Ishti technically, and the other one is technically called Soma sacrifices. And incidentally, please remember that Ashwamedha is a Soma sacrifice, which is more complicated and more detailed than Ishtis, some of which are comparatively simple. The basic Ishti is Agnihotra. It is an offering of milk in fire in the evening and in the morning. It takes about 2 hours to perform that ritual. Then one has to perform some new and full moon sacrifices after each fortnight, which is slightly more detailed than Agnihotra, but it is also comparatively small, and approximately it requires 3 to 4 hours in order to perform an ishti. But among some other ishtis, which are more complicated, that is 4 monthly sacrifices, they require more time, they are more complicated, and the help of more priests also is required for them. And in addition to that, when one wants to perform a Soma sacrifice, one has to take the help of 16 priests. This also is a very important point. So, 16 priests, there are 4 groups. Out of them, 4 belong to Rigveda, 4 belong to Yajurveda, 4 belong to Samaveda, and 4 belong to Atharvaveda. Out of the Atharvavedic priests, which although are technically 4, really only one, namely Brahman, he works independently, but other 3, which are supposed to be belonging to Brahman, in fact, they belong to Rigveda only, and they belong to Rigvedic priest called Hotru. So Hotru has 3 priests belonging to his own branch of knowledge, that is Rigveda, and 3 other branches of Vedas, but actually they are belonging to Rigveda and they recite the mantras from Rigveda. So all these things are kind of background for the study of Shrauta ritual anywhere in the ancient Indian literature. Now, when the TV serials were prepared on Ramayana or Mahabharata, the directors of these serials, the authors who wrote the scripts of these serials, similarly the actors, none of them knew anything about Shrauta ritual, anything about how a sacrifice is performed. And therefore, when there was a direct or indirect reference to any ritual, they used to be shown in a manner of what is in modern days called swahakar. That is, some persons sit around a fire and offer some things in fire. This is not the nature of Vedic Shrauta ritual. Please do not sit around the fire. There are different places where they should sit, how they should work. All these things are described in Shrauta ritual texts. But since the Sanskrit scholars in general and people in the field of TV or cinema, etc., they are totally ignorant about the Vedic ritual. They represent this ritual in a very incorrect form. Now, with this background, I will come to the description of some rituals in Ramayana. Now, in Ramayana, it is said that Parashurama, he was one of the incarnations of Vishnu. The incarnation before the incarnation, namely Rama, is Parashurama performed Ashwamedha sacrifice. Now, if we take into consideration the whole character of Parashurama, we will come to know that it will be impossible for Parashurama to perform Ashwamedha sacrifice. So the most important point here is that Parashurama was a Brahmin. This is one point which is very important to be remembered. And the second point, which is also equally important to be remembered, is that he was unmarried person. In the list of 7 Chirajivins, that is those who are deathless, long living persons, these are 7 in ancient India. And the list includes Parashurama. So Ashwathama, Balir Vyaso, Hanumanscha Vibhishanaha, Rupaha Parashuramascha Saptaite Chirajivinaha. So this is the list of 7 persons who are Chirajivins, but all of them they are unmarried. Now, I have already told that no unmarried person can perform any Soma sacrifice, and consequently, he cannot perform Ashwamedha sacrifice also. So the description that Parashurama performed Ashwamedha should be considered as incorrect, and it must be described as part of ignorance of the author of Ramayana in connection with the details of Shruta ritual. Secondly, as I have already said, Parashurama was a Brahmin, but an Ashwamedha sacrifice is to be performed only by a Kshatriya, and not only by a simple Kshatriya, but a great king. He should be Sarvabhauma, it is a king of entire earth. That is, at least a very great king should be the performer of the Ashwamedha sacrifice. An ordinary king or an ordinary Kshatriya is not authorized to perform this sacrifice at all. And a Brahmin, even if he may be a king or a Sarvabhauma, he may be a great warrior, he may be a great fighter, he may be very physically strong, he cannot perform a sacrifice like Ashwamedha. So, we have to conclude that the reference to the performance of Ashwamedha by Parashurama must be accepted as a controversy or a mistake in the Ramayana. Now we come to another performance of Ashwamedha, which was performed by the hero of this epic, namely Rama. Rama is considered to be the incarnation of God Vishnu. People have a great respect for him. They consider him to be a great God. But let us keep this devotion aside and take into consideration the description of Ashwamedha sacrifice said to be performed by Rama in Ramayana. Now, at the end of this sacrifice, Rama meets his two sons, Lava and Kosha. He meets Sita again, etc. All this story we may keep apart. But we must remember that at the time of the performance of Ashwamedha, Rama had already abandoned Sita. Whether we like this thing, part of the story or not, that is not the point here. We may discuss it separately, whether this act of abandonment is justified or not, whether there was some injustice to Sita and so on. Let us keep these things away from the main point of our discussion. We have to remember that for the performance of any sacrifice, any Soma sacrifice, and Ashwamedha is a Soma sacrifice, the presence of wife is essential. And because Rama had abandoned Sita, and moreover, he had not married again, he had no other wife present at that time. Rama was not authorized to carry out any Shrauta ritual. He should not have performed Ashwamedha. He could not have performed Ashwamedha. Moreover, in some stories of Rama, particularly in Uttara Ramacharita, which is a very great drama composed by Bhubhuti, and his author has slightly changed some parts of Rama's story. There we find that there is a reference to a golden image of Sita. So instead of Sita, her golden image was present at the time of the sacrifice. All these things are very important from the point of view of the love of Rama for Sita, how Rama was Ekapatni Vrata, that is, he was devoted to Sita only, and in the absence of Sita, he put the golden image of Sita and performed the sacrifice. All these things are very interesting from the point of view of poetry and from the point of view of the love between Rama and Sita. But from the point of view of the ritual, we have to remember that there is no provision of keeping any golden image or any other thing as a substitute of the wife in the texts which describe the Shrauta ritual. The physical presence, actual presence, is essential for the sake of sacrifice. And Sita was not present. This is a fact. And one more very interesting and important point is that in order to perform Ashwamedha sacrifice, it is not enough that a king should have only one wife. He should have minimum 4 wives. And 4 wives have to be present at the time of the performance of Ashwamedha. They have not only to be present, but they have to carry out some ritual activities also. They have to take part in the dialogue, which also is a part of ritual. And The physical presence of these wives, it should be minimum 4. If there are more, there is no harm. But minimum 4 should be there, and a king must have 4 wives. And because Rama is very famous and we accept him, we also honor him for his love for Sita, his Ekapatni Vrata. And in the absence of even Sita, he did not marry again. He continued to love Sita. But for the sake of performance of Ashwamedha, to have only one wife or even that wife is also absent, all these things are rather contradictory. And Ashwamedha sacrifice cannot be performed in its original sense in case the performer, that is the king, has no 4 wives, and the sacrifice will remain incomplete. It will not be considered as a sacrifice at all. Actually, this king or the performer will not be authorized to perform Ashwamedha sacrifice at all. So, we have to remember that the author of Ramayana was not fully conversant with the details of Ashwamedha. The word Ashwamedha is very famous. Even on the bank of Ganga, there is a particular ford which is called the Dashashwamedha Ghat. So if one takes bath there, one gets the merit of performance of 10 Ashwamedhas and so on. So Ashwamedha is a kind of standard of measurement, as it were. It was a great sacrifice, it was famous. But the question is not the importance of Ashwamedha, but the details of Ashwamedha. Whether the author has faithfully described them or not, that is the question. And my answer to this question is that the author seems to be totally ignorant about the Ashwamedha sacrifice, and he doesn't know anything beyond the name Ashwamedha. I will give one more detail about the Ashwamedha and how the author of Ramayana also makes a mistake in connection with that. And this point is regarding the offering of the horse. In the Ashwamedha sacrifice, a horse is killed and its different parts are offered in fire to different deities. In other sacrifices also, some other animals like he-goat, etc., they are killed and they are offered to some deities. Whether that is good or bad, that is not the question for us now. And what modern people do now, that is also a different point. In modern days, nowadays, some people do not kill animals. Still they perform Vedic sacrifices. But that is comparatively a new idea. But in Vedic period, people used to kill animals. When the priests and the sacrificer, all of them, they were non-vegetarian people. To kill an animal, to eat some parts of the body of the animal was not considered to be bad at that time. And people used to eat parts of animals. great sages like Vasishtha, Vishwamitra, etc., they also used to work as priests. They also used to eat meat. And there was nothing extraordinary in those days. Nowadays, people belonging to these families, some of them, they are strict vegetarians. Some of them are even vegans. They do not eat even milk or milk products. And this vegetarianism or veganism is spreading not only in India, but also in some foreign countries also. In Europe, America, people are trying to become vegans. They do not like the act of killing animals and so on. Although their number is small, still it is slightly growing. These things are different. Our main point is that horse has to be killed in Ashwamedha sacrifice, according to Vedic texts. In case of other animal sacrifices like he-goat, there is a particular thing which is technically called vapa, is also taken out of the body of that animal and offered in fire. So vapa is a thin layer between the stomach and lungs or the chest of that animal. So it is taken out first and it is offered to fire to some deities. But in connection with horse sacrifice, it is clearly said in Shatapatha Brahmana, which is a text belonging to White Yajurveda, which describes many Vedic sacrifices. There is a statement, Nashvasya Vapasti. That is, in the case of horse sacrifice, Vapa sacrifice is not performed at all. And these things are also described later on by other Vedic texts, namely Shrauta Sutras, and there is no difference of opinion about non-performance of horse vapa. But in Ramayana, it is clearly said that when the Ashwamedha sacrifice was performed, at that time, the omentum or vapa of horse was offered. So we have to accept that it is clearly against the Vedic prescriptions, and it also proves that the author of Ramayana was not knowing any detailed description of Ashwamedha sacrifice. There are also occasional references to some other rituals like Putra Kameshti, which is comparatively a small sacrifice in comparison to Ashwamedha. This is a small sacrifice performed for the sake of obtaining son, which was performed by Dasharatha and so on. So in this way, there are very few and scattered references to Shrauta ritual in Ramayana. But the point to be noted here is that the descriptions of these Shrauta rituals, and particularly that of Ashwamedha, is not authentic, and we cannot accept them to be trustworthy. And we have to conclude that these descriptions are of the nature of controversies and mistakes on the part of the author of Ramayana. And as I have said already in the beginning of my speech, that because these descriptions, these stories were narrated not by any particular person, but rather they have been transmitted from tradition, from one person to another in oral form. And because these suttas, they were not the scholarly persons, they were rather popular speakers who are famous for their oratory, but not for their scholarship. So the same conclusion will be valid in connection with Ramayana. So I conclude my speech here. I thank the organizer of this seminar, online seminar on Ramayana, namely Dr. Ambarish Khare. I thank him, and I also thank listeners whom unfortunately I cannot see. But I hope that they will think over my thoughts and they will also study ancient Indian literature in a philological manner without either respect or disrespect for them and objectively. So thanks again. Namaskar.